Hello everybody. Today we're going to learn how to make this super cute baby onesie. One of my best tips for any sewing project is gather everything you need together before you start. It saves such a lot of wasted time. So let's have a look at what we've got here. We have the pattern here. Now we constructed that in part 1 of the video. You don't have to have my pattern. This method of construction will work for any baby onesie pattern. But if you'd like to take a look, I'll pop a link above and you can learn how to draft this pattern. Most important, the fabric. This pattern is designed for a two-way stretch fabric, so I've got this beautiful, super cute panda fabric, and you can see it stretches in both directions, and it's really soft for a baby, and I can't wait to sew with that. I've also made my own binding, and that's just a strip of fabric, and I've pressed it so that it's nice and neat. But you can also purchase ready-made binding from any haberdashery shop. There's quite a wide range of this available now. But if you want to make your own, then you just need a template for your binding strip and just cut a length of that. Scissors, of course. I always find a fabric marker pen really useful rather than pins. Pins aren't great when you're making baby wear, so preferable to use a fabric marker pen there, but if not, pins, but I would count them out and count them back in. Also, this is quite new to me, and I'll pop a link for these items in my list, my description below. This was fairly cheap, and it's a popper applicator, and if you have a look there, I've tested them, I've even washed this, and they work really well. So yeah, they've got poppers. Good quality thread, and I think that's it. So we can cut out. So let's have a look at the cutting out. Just a few things to mention before we cut out, because we've got this quite patterned and very distinctive fabric here. I always prefer to make whole pattern pieces. It just lets me place particularly small pattern pieces right on the fabric where I want them. So I'm going to place this one. Does it involve wasting a little bit of fabric, but I think it's worth it. I'm going to place this one with the pandas going right the way down the centre front, and with the top of the centre front there on a pink, blank pink piece, so I'm not cutting off half the panda head. My back, so that I don't waste too much fabric, quite happy to have the plain pink strip going down the centre back. The only thing you need to remember as well, I'm also using pattern weights, is that when you cut a sleeve out in this way, you need to cut one this way, and then you need to flip it over and cut the other. I'm going to make sure that my sleeves are exactly the same in terms of the pattern placement. Also, I am making my own binding, so I'm going to cut an extra long strip right the way to the edge of the fabric. Just to show you here, I bought 3/4 metre of fabric for this project. I've already cut out one onesie here. I can cut out another one out of this, and I've still got all this fabric left. So I think if you purchased a metre, you get 3 onesies out of a metre, so pretty good value. Let's just take a look at the pieces I've already cut out. So I have my binding here, 2 sleeves, and I've marked my notches at the sleeve head here, 2 notches at the back and a notch at the front, and I have a pair of sleeves. I've got the front and the back, so pandas going down the centre front, and a little gap at the top here, and then strip down here. So next we're going to head over to the sewing machine and we're going to do something called stay stitching. We're going to run a row of stitches just within the seam allowance all the way around this edge here and this edge, so the neck edges, and all the way along the hems. And what these stay stitches will do is prevent this garment from stretching too much as we sew it, so it's going to help, and it's well worth taking the time to do it. So join me over on the sewing machine and we'll start the making process. Can't wait. For my stay stitching, I want my machine stitch to be at its longest, so I'm going to pop that right up to 5, and your machine may be different. I'm just going to stay stitch just within where my binding is going to come, and I know I plan my binding to be a centimetre wide, so I'm just going to use the width of the foot. If any of the stay stitching is visible when you've finished, you can always take it out. So I'm just going to very gently take the fabric through, not pulling it at all, I'm just feeding it through. I don't want it to gather and I don't want it to pull, just to be neutral, and run a row of what's called stay stitches all the way along there. And what that does is that allows me to work with this without it stretching. So I'm going to do the same for the hems, and I'm going to do the same for the front as well. Let's take a look at the binding technique. Now, if you've ever attached a waistband, it's exactly the same sewing technique as applying a waistband to a skirt or a pair of trousers. So this is the way I prefer to do it. There are other ways as well. So I've got my binding here, and I've made mine. I've made it 2 centimetres wide, and I've also pressed it so that I've got some creases here. I've got some crease lines so that I can see where I'm applying my crease lines to. If you buy binding as well, that'll also be pressed, and that'll have crease lines on. It's slightly narrower than the one I've got, or the one I've made for myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a little overlap here. I don't want it to be right to the edge here, because I just need a little bit extra to be able to trim the right shape as it comes off. I'm going to pop the edge of the binding to the edge of the fabric, and I'm going to be stitching along here. You'll see me stitching it in a minute. That then comes up, and then that folds down, and that folds on top. And then I'll stitch again from the right side. Now you can do it the other way around, so that you could stitch from the wrong side. I prefer to be stitching from the right side. If you look at this sample that I produced earlier, I've used a decorative stitch here. It's just a zigzag with a line either side on my sewing machine. Now you can use a zigzag if you don't have that stitch, or you can be experimental and see what stitches you have on your machine. So let's go over to the machine and apply the binding to the necklines and the hemlines. I have the neckline here that I've already stay stitched with the right side facing down, and then I have my binding strip also with the right side facing down. I'm going to pop the edge of my binding to the edge of my fabric, my main fabric, and I'm going to just make it overlap a little bit. Now I always have a centimetre seam allowance on my patterns. I prefer to have extra and trim it off than have my machine chew it all up. Also, a point to note, I've reduced my stitch length so that I haven't got that long stay stitch. I'm now going to stitch taking my centimetre seam allowance, applying the binding to the edge of the neckline, and I'm just going to gently ease it round, and there's no need to rush with this. Just take your time and make sure that you're compressing the fabric. You're taking your correct seam allowance and you're placing the edge of the binding to the edge of the neckline without any stretch. And this won't need to stretch because it's an envelope opening and it'll slip easily over the baby's head. So here I am at the centre front. I've got my centre front notch there, halfway there, so just carry on and I'll do the rest of the stitching. So now, if I just fold that back, you can see that I can, that's a little pull, I can fold that edge in, that over, and pop that on top. Now you may like to trim down inside of here if you think it's a little bit bulky. I caught made a little mistake there and caught a couple of tucks in there, so just to show you that we all make mistakes. I'm going to carry on and hopefully my binding will cover that up. Should be fine. So I can trim this down if I want to. I didn't on my sample and I found it quite useful to have the bulk to be able to support the poppers, so I'm going to carry on, fold that over and fold that on top. And again, you'll notice I'm not using pins, I'm just using my hands to manipulate all this, and this will go underneath the sewing machine, and the little bit extra that I left is always really handy. Now you can use a zigzag stitch here, or you can use a decorative stitch. So I'm going to just use a regular zigzag stitch. I think that's what most people will be using. So that's stitch number 5 on my machine. And I'm just going to make the width and the length a little bit bigger. And you want the edge of your zigzag to go to the fold of the edge of your fabric, the binding there. So that's our first bound edge. That looks quite neat. So I'm going to carry on now and I'm going to do exactly the same for both hemlines and the neck on the other piece, which is the back. So here we are back at the table. I've bound the necklines and the hemlines. So the next stage is to just hold the overlap at the neck in place. If I just show you down here, I've got my pattern piece here and my notches are really important here. So I've got notch here on the overlap of the shoulder, so that has to meet, and I know that my overlap here needs to come down onto the bottom of the notch for the armhole. So just to be sure now, I want my back to come on to my front. So I know this is my front, I've got my pandas going down the front and I've checked much bigger neckline on the front. So I'm going to overlap these here, and I've used my fabric pen. It's really useful for things like this, and I much prefer this to notching, and very handy to have. So I will line up and match my notch with my notch, and I want the overlap to come to the front. Not like on this one where I made a mistake and my overlap came to the back. So line up those notches, and I'm going to allow myself one pin just to show you. And seriously, if you're using pins on baby wear, just make sure that you've collected all your pins up at the end. You don't want to leave them in. So that now needs to be stitched in position. So I'm just going to put a holding stitch in from there to there to hold that, and I'll do the same on the other side. I'll match the notches and I'm going to just stitch that in position, and then I can put the sleeve in. I don't want to be fiddling around with all these layers. I want these held down and in position before I put the sleeves in. So I'm going to go and do that, and I'll meet you back here and we'll have a look at putting the sleeves in. So here we are back at the table. I've just secured my two neck edges, and now my little overlaps, I can just trim those off. I don't need those anymore. They just were there to give me enough to catch into all the seams. Whoops! Hopefully that'll go in the seam. Okay, so now my sleeves need to go in. The sleeves go in open, and front and back. We always know back because we've got two notches here. So what I'm going to do is to just place my sleeve like this, and I just want to check that my sleeve matches. So I want to check it matches there, that notch matches there, and then that'll come all the way around here, and you can just about see it's fading off because this pen does fade off as you work with it. Matches there, and then all the way around, and hopefully those two match there, and then round to the end there at the underarm. So I'm going to sew both my sleeves in, and I'll join you back, and then we'll do the side seams, and we're almost done. Okay, so here we are. I'm taking my centimetre seam allowance, popping the edge of the sleeve to the underarm, and then just travelling around, and I want to aim for all my notches to match. And I'm taking the correct seam allowance. And stop there, and my needle down the sleeve head, notch, carry on all the way around. Right here. Now if you have a serger, now would be the perfect time to use that, or an overlocker, to neaten those edges. You don't have to, this fabric won't fray. You can just trim this down a little bit to reduce the bulk. So I am going to serge mine. So I'll just... There we go, I'm just going to overlock or serge the edge of this seam, just for neatness. But as I said, it's not necessary for quality. It's only my personal preference. So we're almost there. All we need to do now is just to hem the sleeve, and we need to do the side seams all in one go, and then we'll have a look at applying the poppers to the hem. So I'm just going to fold my hem allowance up by 2 centimeters, and I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. Cover stitch should be perfect for this hem as well, or any stretch stitch you have on your machine, whatever your preference is. I'm going to make it fairly wide. We do need a little bit of stretch on this sleeve hem, just in case the mum needs to get her hands up inside the garment to help dress the baby. So there we go, we're hemmed there. I'm going to do the same for the other side very quickly. So our next step is to just turn this way, and we're going to stitch from the sleeve hem here all the way down, making sure that the sleeves on the armhole are facing off the body, and down to the bottom of the hem here. And you'll notice I've still got here what I call handles. I find these handy to leave on right to the last minute, so I can hold these and make sure that when I come down here I've got something to hold on, so that I line up beautifully here and that I've got a continuous seam here. So again, you can use a stretch stitch, you can use a slight zigzag. I'm going to just stitch mine, and I'm going to overlock after. Perfectly aligned at the hem. And both seams facing downwards off the shoulder. Take a moment before you get to the end. Just make sure that these are perfectly aligned, your edges together, and these two edges here are perfectly level, otherwise you'll have a jog in your side and it won't look very professional. And then the back tack here. And now I can go ahead and trim those down, and I can trim the seam allowance down a lot more if I want to. Trim that edge all the way up there. I'm going to do the other side seam, and then we're going to take a look at how the poppers will be applied. So here we are at the stage where we've sewn all the side seams and we're almost there. Just a matter of popping the poppers on. So what I've done is I've already taken my pattern and I've marked where I want my central popper to go and where I want my second popper to go, and I've mirrored that on the other side. So you can see they're marked on perfectly there from the pattern. I've done the same to the back as well. And I've marked it with my disappearing fabric pen. Let's hope it doesn't disappear too quickly. So your little machine comes with quite a few attachments, bits and bobs. It comes with a bradawl, a pokey thing. I'm going to use my regular one. And what I need to do is first of all make a hole in the fabric through there so that it clears the way for the popper to go through, and the same on the other side. Make my hole. Okay, I got myself 6 tops and 6 gentlemen, they're the male popper, and 6 lady poppers, so they're the female poppers. The gentleman goes on top, so the gentleman will come over and he'll go on top here. So what we do is we pop that through there. Goes through pretty easily, and you know, I didn't trim down any of the bulk in here. I left it because I wanted it pretty thick and sturdy, but you can trim down if you want to. And we put the gentleman popper on top there. I'm just going to press that a little bit. You get the popper machine and you just rest it in there, and once it's in there you squeeze as hard as you can. Sometimes they make a little click. I think that's this piece being compressed, and it's on. So our very last popper here, having made the hole in here, I'm just going to pop that through there, so that's pointing up. Place the female part on top, rest it in there, and gently apply pressure down. There you go. So that is secure. So now we can close these, pop them into position, and we're complete. So here we have our little baby body or baby onesie complete, poppers attached, little sleeves, envelope neck, and hopefully you've enjoyed making this. And don't forget to have a look at part 1 of this video where it shows you how to make the pattern for this, and also there's links to everything I've used in the description below. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you hopefully again. Bye bye.